Here's part 2 of The Spirit of Yagin Lives.
My great-great-grandfather was taken on the Alina River. He was unaware he was being hunted. He didn't know he was a hunted man, and we don't think he'd done anything wrong. We think he was taken, executed by a firing squad, and then they hung him up on a tree there to display what they've done, no matter how evil it was. And then they cut him down, and they still wouldn't give his body back to my tribe so that they could give him a tribal burial by our customs. So they denied him that. They deliberately denied him that.
Yagin signified our struggle more so than anything else. He was the justice fighter, and I guess all of us today carry the same yoke that Yagin carried, and still seeking for justice for our people and giving us equal rights, which we've never had. Even though we're here in our own country, in our own land, we've never had that. And Yagin stood for all that. That was why they persecuted him and they shot him.
Well, what happened to him was that he was beheaded. I think that was very sad. And, they reckon that, people are barbaric and uneducated and uncivilised, but for them to do what they did to him, according to history, well, I don't think that was right at all. So who's the uncivilised people?
His cart, or his head, was severed, smoked, put on public display for people to see and to glorify themselves over, that this was the man that was the big threat to us taking this land, and here he is, he's dead, and his skull his cart was sent back to England. In them days, white fellas had this fascination with anthropology and how human beings had come to be, and white people obviously thought then and still do today, think that they're a little bit superior to other peoples. I can remember a bloke called Ken Colbung, chairman of the Australian Institute of Aboriginal Studies in Canberra in the 70s. Ken informed all of these anthropologists and historians that were associated with this institute that what we call the repatriation of skeletal remains of Aboriginal Australians must be done as a matter of urgency or as a priority. So the Aboriginal leaders in Perth, or the elders in Perth at that time, the story goes that they had much adventure in trying to locate Yagin, the cart, and in fact when they did locate it, it was under the skeletal remains of some young babies and people that had been buried. So they had to be very delicate and go through some very personal and intimate arrangements to get the cart back.
For 23 years, Ken Colbung has campaigned for the exhumation and return of Yagin's head to Western Australia, where the resistance leader was killed by English settlers in 1833. The head was brought to England as a souvenir. Yagin's tribe wants it returned to free his spirit.
I come here to be able to resolve a very difficult situation, one in which my senior elders have stated to me, we want you to bring back that head of Yagin.
After presenting it with an Aboriginal didgeridoo, Ken Colbung got a sympathetic hearing from the Liverpool City Council. But its hands are tied. Yagin's head was discarded by a museum and buried here in 1964. Stillborn babies were also buried here. The Home Office says the grave shouldn't be disturbed, but at least one mother doesn't mind.
Anything to help Ken. I'm here to support him, because his need to have that head back where it belongs is far greater than to have the babies disturbed.
Ken Colbung's confident that with the help from the baby's parents and the Liverpool Council, he'll soon be returning to Australia with the remains of his heroic ancestor.
My brother happened to be in that delegation that went to England, my brother Richard, and they brought his cart back.
It was decided that Bob Ropo and Ken Colbung and Ming Lee would be the emissaries that would go across and to bring back their head. Then I got a phone call to say that I was included because they found out that I had a genetic tie to Yagin, and being the grandson, the eldest living grandson of Yagin, then it was my right to go over there, and the others wanted that to happen because they were afraid that the spirit of Yagin would come onto them and would bring about their demise. We found out that the head may be held by the city of Liverpool. We travelled out there and they came and said, we're going to give your warrior back to you so that you can take him home. And next morning we decided we would go to the Everton cemetery and thank all the paupers that were there on behalf of their parents and for allowing us to retrieve the cart. I think there was 8 to 11 layers on top of Yagin, and we had to go right down the side. I spoke first, and the English magpies were talking, and when we went to talk, they went quiet. As soon as I finished, they started speaking again across to one another. Bob Brofo spoke, and they went quiet. And then they started again when he finished, and then when Ken Colbung spoke, they went quiet again. And then Ming Lee, when she spoke, they went quiet again. And then they started to speak. Then they flew off. They knew that that was the last. And then we were standing there, and then all of a sudden I heard this bird whistle. And I went... And I said, Ming Lee, I said, can you hear that? I said, do you know what kind of bird that is? She said, no. She said, I didn't hear it. And then I shouted out and I said, Uncle, I said, let it bim-bam again. Let it whistle again. Let it whinge-whinge, bim-bam, whinge-whinge again for us. And then I went. And then it whistled again. And I said, well, fly out. I said, fly out and let me see you. And then all of a sudden I heard this flutter of the wings, and it flew out. You know what it was? It was a twin H, a 28 parrot from West Australia, the same colour and everything. And I said, well, where there's one, there's got to be 2. He's whistling for his mate. And they flew out and they just went over the other side of the cemetery. And there was 2 of them. And then when they were flying, they were whistling. Both of them were whistling going over there. When they sat over there, they whistled again, and then they stopped.
Once they acquired the cart, they then proceeded to make sure that it was Yagin. They then secured it in a little box to bring back, wrapped it up in an Aboriginal flag and brought it back to Perth. I got a call from my uncle a couple of days before they got back to say, you need to come to the international airport, drive out on the tarmac, and you need to pick up Yagin's cart and look after him for the night for us, because we need someone to pick it up on the night and look after him. I was very honoured by this because I have had stories told to me by my father that we are related to Yagin. So I thought this might be a part of my destiny in playing out my role as a modern Noongar man. I went out to the airport. I picked up the box with the cart in it. I said g'day to all the elders and the people who were out there. I then proceeded to drive from the international airport back to the Aboriginal Medical Service where I was the CEO. As I was driving, I got to the Redcliffe Bridge, and I'm sitting in my car, and there's this box with the cart of this man called Yagin on the side of me. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, this will be the first time this bloke or this cart has come back. If you know how human beings react to these sorts of things, well, then you can understand that my reaction was starting to become quite overwhelming. I remember my car slowing down while I drove across the Redcliffe Bridge, and my neck involuntarily looking that side of the bridge and then that side of the bridge. So I sort of moved my neck in an involuntary way, or whether it was me being caught up in the, as I said, the overwhelming romance or the adventure of it all. But I'd looked up the river in both ways, and I said to myself in my mind, hey, Yagin, what do you think of the Swan River now? What do you think of the Derbyl Yagin now? And as I got to the other side of the bridge, I started to pick my speed back up, and then I took this box to the Derby Health Service, where I had a security guard waiting for me, and the security guard asked me what was in the box, and I said, "Oh, it's all right, mate, you just look after it for us, you just got to look after it." We put it in our financial room, which is the most secure room, because that's where you got your vault and all your accounts and things. So we said to him, "Look after him in this room tonight, look after this box in this room, it's very important." I went home, and I got back in the morning. When I got back, the security guard comes up to me shaking and says, "What have you got in that box?" There's something very powerful in there, because I heard people walking around on the roof here last night, or there was things walking around on the roof. He says, "You either got followed back from the airport," he said, "or there's something in that bloody box that I can't understand," he said, "because there were noises on the roof all night, and I was absolutely packing myself in here." Immediately after that, my Uncle Richard called me, and we had to work out a place to secure the cart, because this is something more precious than a big diamond to a lot of us. We secured the cart in a bank vault, would you believe, for the next 6 or so years, or 7 years. And we couldn't get funding from government to go and bury him, to rebury the cart in a proper cultural way. And eventually we did secure funding after a 10-year battle with governments to do it right. We tried to find the rest of the remains. We used all sorts of modern technology, and the old fellas used lots and lots of modern technology, including radar techniques to determine bone in the ground. And we were unable to find the rest of the skeleton. And I would presume that in history the people might have taken bits and pieces of this man's bones in the early days as a result of trying to have a memento of this magnificent man, or somehow history has just slipped by and we've lost the location. But anyway, we did rebury the cart where the elders thought that Yagin's remained, somewhere in that vicinity. On my way to take Yagin's cart back up to the burial site, I took him on a bit of a journey up the river. And at various places on the river, I took the cart out of the box, held it in my hand. I said, "Hey, old man, you're back. You're back here." And I said, "And I want all of these animals here and everybody to know that you're back and you're complete. You can find your own way to the rest of your body, but you can do it now." And it started to sprinkle a bit of rain. I took my hands after I touched the cart, and I put my hands in the little creek that was running down into the Derby, and I washed Yagin's essence into the river, back into the Swan River. And I then went up to Guildford, where the little creek runs down from Success Hill. That's where I took him first. And then I went across the other side of the river, and I also walked and jumped across puddles, and there were coolbardis and wardungs and jitty-jitties all flying around in this rainy sort of weather, and I couldn't work it out, but there were lots of movement of birds in a rainy sort of day. And I'm thinking, wow. But I told them all, I said, "Yagin's back." And I went down and I put my hand in the river again, washed my hands, and then proceeded up to the burial site at about 8 or 8:30 in the morning. And lo and behold, you wouldn't believe what was over the top of the burial site. The most magnificent rainbow, right over the arch from one side right across to the other. And a lot of people there that were informing me to look up at the rainbow. And when Uncle Richard and I carried the cart into the site to be buried, this magnificent rainbow just put a big arch over the top of us, and we knew that this was a significant event.
And the rain stopped, we did the ceremony, and we buried the cart. Then I said to them, "I will be out there next morning at dawn, and I'm going to see a sign to say that Yagin has risen and that he's going back on the land before he goes into the dreaming with his family." So we looked up towards the hills, the Murrumura, which is the Darling Range, and the sky was starting to lighten. And then as the light come down, it came, you could see it coming down the hill. It come down and it got onto the trees there, and the trees were black on our side, but the light was on top there. the white light. Then all of a sudden we heard this whoosh, 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 whoosh. And I was waiting for this whatever it was to come out and show itself. And you know what it was? It was the largest red-tailed eagle that I'd ever seen. He rose above the trees like that, and he was going in one spot there. And then you know what he did? He turned around, he went around in a circle, and he came back like that, and he hit the whoosh, 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 and then he folded his wings, and then he come down, and he flew, and he looked down on us there, and I'm sure that he was looking only at me. He was coming there, and much as he was saying to me, like, thank you, whoosh, 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 and his wings were going like that. We could almost feel the vibration and the wind off his wings. And then he did a little circle like that, and he flew. Where did he fly? He flew down the escarpment of the river. And where did he go? He flew along the river towards Perth. He had to go back over his ground because Yagin was from the Billiere people, which was the start from Juralup, which is Victoria Park, and Garnup, and over to the Melville waters, Perth waters, and that's the Duttonborough, and the Bunninborough are Duttonborough. That's where he would have went, and he flew down there. They tell me now that ever since we buried Yagin back there, there's 2 resident eagles who patrol that area. The spirit of Yagin is alive and well through those 2 eagles that have come back there to mark the anniversary of Yagin being buried there.
The Spirit of Yagin is alive and well was produced by Kanwa, the Community Arts Network WA, with oral historian and radio broadcaster Bill Bunbury. Additional production for RN was by Awaye's Lorena Allam. You heard speaking in order Nigel Wilkes, Peter Wilkes, Bella Brofo, Albert Karana, Ted Wilkes, Gary Wilkes, Sharon Wilkes, Gwen Karana, and Richard Wilkes. Thank yous to the Wajak Budja Gateway Aboriginal Corporation, to the Swan River Elders, to the Swan River Noongar community, to the City of Swan, and the Department of Culture and the Arts. On our website, there's a link to Kanwa and a gallery of watercolour paintings by the Swan River artist, Vanessa Karana. Check it out at abc.net.au/rn. And find Awaye in the program menu on the right-hand side. Last week on the show, Emma Donovan spoke about her project to teach her Gumbaynggirr language through music. Well, the singer-songwriter Gina Williams is about to release an album of songs in Noongar next Friday in Fremantle. Well, the album is a collaboration with guitarist Guy Gauss. And next week, we sit down with the both of them to talk about the album and the wider cultural project to keep the Noongar language alive.
It's really interesting because a lot of it's down to the artists with the support of elders and language speakers. I read recently that there's actually 240 speakers left. There used to be 16 dialects, it's now across 14 dialects. So if you consider if an elder passes away, we run a real risk of losing an entire dialect of our language. So it's, it's kind of past critical. And yet what we're seeing are these really beautiful things emerging out of it, and it's largely led by artists. You know, we're in a really critical position at the moment in terms of the survival and the thriving of our language, but I think that there's some really important, great people who are highly motivated, so we are in fact seeing some really fantastic things happening in the West.
Nalak china no no por
It's about legacy. It's about, you know, we acknowledge that terrible things have happened. We acknowledge that awful things were done to decimate our language and our culture and our people. My mother was taken from her mother, who was taken. And, you know, Mum was never allowed to speak her language. And so for me, it's about regaining that and setting it right. Guy has this wonderful turn of phrase. He says it's about rewriting scripts. And that's, you know, I feel like we're firmly in the business of doing that. What's happened has happened, and we will never forget that. We will always acknowledge that, and we always honour the elders that had to endure this. But now it's about what we do. It's about what we do at this point in time to make it better for our kids.
That's the singer-songwriter Gina Williams with guitarist Guy Gauss, my guests next week here on Awaye. And
yeah, well, let's just hope the copyright software program Nazi doesn't decide to ping me for having music on my radio broadcast. I really enjoyed the music, I just couldn't stop for the sake of the copyright laws. Let's hope it squeaks through. There you go. The spirit of Yagin lives. What do you think of that, VB Ed? You're walking on his land. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.